Hello, I'm Dave Marsh, the Spy Guy, and welcome to Land of Confusion, the show where I kind of talk to different types of people about different things. Sometimes we have an interview guests. Let me just check my settings here. Camera, audio. Aha, it is going the wrong mic. I should have pressed that button beforehand. There we go. Anyways, I was saying, I'm trying to relaunch this show right now. I had a impromptu stream last week, watching the results of the American elections with a few people. And then I was like, I've been trying to reach out to a couple people who I know who thought about being like co-hosting. And one guy's like, constantly having situations, just like tonight, he's going to be running a few minutes late, but I said I could rant for 50 minutes without him. So right now, what I'm really thinking about, wanted to do a kind of an interesting open, and one of my opens is tonight is I've been watching Piers Morgan a bit on X. Don't dead name X. Don't call it Twitter anymore. We gotta. If we're, I love how I get billed, by the way, for X, and it says X, formerly known as Twitter. Like, who do you think you are, Elon Musk? Prince? You can just throw up that kind of stuff out there? Anyway, so Paul will be along in about 15, 20 minutes. Maybe we'll start the show at 8 if that works out for him better in the future. Anyways, let us saying about Piers Morgan. He's been having some very interesting people from the alternative media space coming on and actually allowing them to speak. I still am shocked the first time he brought Jackson Hinkle on. And he's like, well, there's apparently right-wing conservatives that are pro-Russian. And I'm like, right-wing conservatives? Jackson Hinkle's a Stalinist. I don't call a person who thinks Joe Stalin and communism, his particular brand of communism, right-wing. That's definitely not something I'm a big thinker of. But, he brings this guy on, and for 10 minutes, he lets, uninterrupted, he allowed him to speak on at least the Russian perspective of the Ukraine war, talking about the 8 years of civil war and going back, and then Pierce spouts off on something, and of course Jackson goes in for the kill and says, "Can't help but notice that you only started talking about this war in February 2022. You have 0 tweets in your timeline talking about the Ukrainian-Russian civil war for the last 8 years, starting in the Maidan coup of 2014." And Pierce was like, and then of course you had Konstantin Kinson on, who just did a recent post on his blog talking about how he was wrong about the Ukraine war and how it should end. And then he started, and he's like, and people like me would try to go there, and he's like, oh, it's behind my paywall. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's fine. You have a paywall. But he then starts arguing with not Piers Morgan. It was Peter Hitchens. Hitchens calls him out and says, oh yeah, great to see you're finally on my side. And he's like, if you had read my article, you would know that I have this very different perspective from you, Mr. Hitchens. And I'm like, you want us to pay you money to find out what you think, and then are upset when we refuse to pay you money for your story so we can argue with you. Sorry, buddy, you gotta be... It's one thing you have this thing that's there, but you don't get to go around the world yelling at people who refuse to pay for your content. Who do you think you are, Marvel? It's just kind of ridiculous in that regard. So Piers Morgan's out there, and he's bringing on all these people, and he's bringing people on who are on the different side of things. And then, of course, for his temerity for bringing on someone who might disagree with him, might be on the different side of the perspective, he's getting slagged on by both sides. And so I just posted on X, much as I disagree with you, Mr. Morgan, I appreciate the fact you're bringing on different people and you're exposing your audience to things I'm fairly certain they've never heard before. And it's a great thing to see, because I'm like, so those of us out here who are steeped in this stuff, who educate themselves, like I wasn't really paying that much attention to Ukraine before the war, but I had read a few articles on the Ukraine-Russian conflict and how it went, and I had some vague ideas of what's happening. But certainly, I remember being at my birthday party like a week before the war started, arguing with my friend about Russians aren't going to attack Ukraine. Like that would be the 6th time this year that they were supposed to attack Ukraine, because they were supposed to do it the last year, and we had like all these scary warnings coming up, and they never did. And I'm like, and maybe a lot of those bases that you're talking about are Russian army bases that just happen to be on the Ukrainian border. Why wouldn't it would make sense? You would have your Russian army bases around your borders to protect your country from attack or to launch invasions, as it turned out to be. But for me, that learning about what happened, when the war broke out, I was kind of shocked. I was like, well, surely the Russians are invading 20,000. I was thinking like maybe 20,000 Russian peacekeepers are going into the Donbass, and they would be reinforcing them and basically telling the Ukraine army that was forming up to fight them, if you really want the Donbass back, you're going to have to attack us Russian peacekeepers, like little green men invading the Crimea. And no, it's like 200,000 guys are attacking, and they're going all over the place, and they're really loose from their supply lines, like they're being commanded by Kelly's heroes. And then I realized almost instantly, if the Russians are serious about this, they've had to do a lot of planning, a lot of logistics. They're not just doing this off the cuff. They've had to build up an arms industry to support this type of movement in case it doesn't work out. And it didn't work out exactly as they hoped it would, though it wasn't a very nearly run thing. Initially, the Ukrainians were like, whoa, you're really going to fight us? Okay, hold on. Well, let's, what are your terms? Oh, okay, you just want us to be neutral and institute Minsk too? Okay, that's fine. And then Boris Johnson shows up and now we know he got his $5 million bribe from the military-industrial complex to do a series of speeches after he was no longer prime minister, to basically tell Zelensky, no, we have your backing. We're the West. We're awesome. And we will totally help you defeat Russia. And then find out that the West has been basically a paper tiger. Like, for me, I don't as a man of the West, I'm not happy to see the West be defeated, going through all this stuff. But the fact is, having all our weapons in Russia's ally, or our manufacturing in Russia's ally, is a big problem. And of course, Russia's ally is China, and China is backing Russia, doing interesting things. Like, what is the latest thing I just read about on Patricia Marin's channel on Twitter? You want to get a good understanding of what's going on. She's very good at talking about the different weapons situations for both sides. And she's apparently just some Spanish housewife. I assume she must have an intelligent background, or at least an interest in history like I do. So there she is. If you want to find out about stuff, she's very good on that. Sorry, I don't have a cold, but I haven't had my allergy pill in 3 days. I have to go to the store tomorrow and get some. But I want to get here home on time to talk about stuff and kind of do the relaunch here with some specification. So, like I said, I didn't want that to happen. But to me, the minute the war started, if we were going to be serious about it, we had to start ramping up ammunition, and we had to start ramping up cruise missiles. We would have to move our economies in the West to a war economy, slicing down on civilian production and increasing up our military production to support the Ukrainians. The problem is we didn't want to recognize that would be something we'd have to do. We just thought, we'll just send the Ukrainians all our old war stocks. We're just going to wipe everything out, and we'll rebuild off of that. And remember in March of 2022 when the Russians were running out of cruise missiles? How many times did we have to hear that going on? I had serious generals. I'm watching I was still subscribed to Hudson Institute, or no, not Hudson. The guys from California, Stanford, Hoover Institution. Still subscribed to them. And they had the Goodfellas podcast, and they had General McMaster's there, Trump's former national security advisor, 3-star general, writer of all these books. And he's basically saying, oh, well, Russia's going to run out of cruise missiles because we would run out of cruise missiles. And then we watched all summer long as the Russians weren't running out of cruise missiles. They still haven't run out of cruise missiles. And though there was occasionally victories like the sinking of the Moscow and a few other things, we just didn't really see. It's just the Russians were prepared. They spent the last 8 years preparing up their economy to something what I keep comparing to 1970s America, where they have this military-industrial complex that actually responds to the needs of the military instead of making Raytheon and Lockheed Martin stockholders rich. Not that I'm complaining as a Raytheon and Lockheed Martin stockholder about the money that I'm making off of this war. If anyone, that's the great thing. Sometimes little guys can make the money off the big guys. But still, here we are having to watch all these people die, and they're getting their butts kicked. And it seems so obvious to me, like millions of rounds of artillery fire are coming in, and no one is doing anything. Here was listening to Scott Ritter on Garland Nixon. Say what you want about that. Scott, I think, has had much of the war pretty well right. He's definitely in the same mindset as I. And he's like, the Russians are now up to 1.5 million rounds of artillery ammunition production a month. We're not making 1.5 million artillery production in a year. We're not going to be able to do that. They say that in order to, the New York Times, I believe, was saying that in order to get up to 2 million rounds of ammunition a year, that will be 2026. You're not going to, Ukraine ain't going to be around then at that time, or not the Ukraine you think of as that. And then we got this, I had this argument with a friend of mine in March, and he was just going off about, you believe Russian propaganda. I'm like, I've studied military conflict for the last 20 freaking years. I know what a battle and what a disparity of forces is. And you're going to try and tell me because I know how to read a map and look at an order of battle, I'm some sort of Putin apologist or Putin propagandist. I'm like, no, I know what it is. And he's like, well, we have this summer offensive. I'm like, I really hope your summer offensive goes well for you. I really hope you get to Melitopol or Tokmak or something of those significance. But I'm going to tell you, I've looked at the map of the Russian defenses. I haven't seen anything out like that since the Korean War. And you're going to get your ass kicked because the Russians are just going to sit there behind their trench lines and blast you with artillery and airstrikes, and you're going in with no air cover and lower an unfair outnumbered 3-1 on artillery expenditures. You're going to lose. This is how this works. And apparently, the Ukrainian government was telling all their soldiers with their 5 weeks training, and they're admitting this on TV, that they've only given the Ukrainian army troops 5 weeks training. I'm like, no, that doesn't work that way. You need at least 3 months to get even basic infantry, just to teach people how to march straight. And you want to have 5 weeks of this, and you're trying to tell me this is going to work? And it turns out the Ukrainians were being basically told, oh yeah, the Russians are on their last ropes. They're just a conscript army. Like, I'm sorry, guys, World War I and World War II were fought for 4 years and 7 years on conscript armies. Conscription is not a bad thing. The French and the Germans, millions of men, the living en masse that Napoleon pioneered, or well, the revolution pioneered, and of course he brought it in, shows up that conscription armies are just as effective as so-called volunteer armies. What volunteer armies are better at is not inflicting the war weariness on the populace that a conscription army can veil. When you're forcing so many men out of the economy and forcing them into situations. But people can be just as patriotic, if not more so. That, and that's the thing. I remember talking to a friend of mine at the beginning of a few months ago. I said, we know, he started talking about the crappiness of the Russian army because it's all conscripts. And I said, we know that the Austrian-Hungarians in 1914, 1915, the Italians in 1915, and the Turks in 1914, 1915 had massive popular waves of 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 recruits that come into the army because they're patriotic lovers of their country. Why would you think the Russians are any less patriotic than them? And he looked at me like a dumb idiot. I don't want to say he's a dumb idiot, but like it just never even occurred to him. And of course, this leads to my personal theory about what's been going on here and why the West has been so clueless and so incompetent about this, about Russia. And I hate to say it, but it seems to be racism to me. It's just like the only times I've ever seen people talk about the Russian army and the Russian people is the same way that the Southerners in movies are portrayed talking about black people. And it's just like people believing incredibly stupid, dumb things early on in the war. People who, I know one's a police officer, others who are smart people, and they would just drop stuff on me. And I'm like, we know that's not true. There are all these early recordings in the war where there were Russians supposedly on cell phones talking to other Russians and like just giving away their positions and all this other stuff. And I'm like, we know from the Snowden leaks that America has the ability to listen to every single cell phone in Afghanistan. We know that for a fact. So if we, the civilians reading newspapers, know that, and the internet, then the Russians will know that. And these idiots are like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no. Like, I saw pictures during the 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia, and it's just walls of cell phones nailed gun to concrete walls because the Russian army didn't want anyone knowing, told its soldiers not to carry cell phones with them. And if they were caught with a cell phone, they would nail their cell phone to the wall. And the few times we saw in this war where, say, there was one time, I believe it was Christmas of last year, a couple of Russian barracks, about like 120 guys were killed because a couple of guys decided to cell phone home to Christmas. So the Russians were not using cell phones, but I'm getting all these things. And then thank God for Dryzen. I don't know if many people, some old time watchers of this channel would know who Dryzen is, but Dryzen is a Russian and Ukrainian speaker. And he was listening to these things and he was doing translations. And he says, basically, most of these cell phone conversations that the media were playing were basically like Ukrainians trying to fake Russian accents, speaking in badly spoken Russian, saying like, oh, ho, ho, see that girl over? Let's go over her and attack her. Oh, yeah, hey. It's like that kind of level of stupidity. And, of course, we in the West were just eating it up. And it's like this kind of thing, this racist attitude I found, just meant that we underestimated the Russians and their capabilities. I remember talking to other people, and they're just like, well, I just don't believe the Russians are capable of that. And I'm like, why do you think that? And they're like, well, the early mistakes they made in the war where they did stupid stuff. I'm like, guys, no one has done what the Russians were trying to do since 2003 during the Iraq invasion. Like, you have to forgive, you don't have to forgive, but you have to understand that opposed landings at the battalion level against a seaborne bridge, this doesn't happen very much anymore. Like, muscle memory is something that can be learned, but over time, just because armies kind of blunder around for a bit because they just don't know how to fight, doesn't change the fact that they will learn how to fight and fight well. And I'm just checking to see if I got any more answers here. Nope. Okay, yeah, so no, sorry, just checking the email there. Anyways, like, we've seen all this stuff in this war that's gone on for 2 years, but I just remember I've been reading this book about, I just read a couple books on the 5-Day War, And oh yeah, of course we have all this propaganda. Russia wants to invade all the way, and once they take Ukraine, they're going to Poland and the Baltic states. I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think the Russians want to occupy, tangle, and get all that stuff. They kind of gave that up for a reason, and they don't necessarily want that. I don't think they want to have a Ukraine. They want a neutral Ukraine for the same reason I don't want a neutral Ukraine. I want a neutral Ukraine because I'm not, for all my ownership of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, I don't want American nuclear missiles put 3 minutes to Moscow because idiotic neocons in the United States think that want to make sell a few more weapons, but also think they can win a nuclear war. Because what's going to happen is the Russians are going to go from a 30-minute flight time to a 3-minute flight time. Well, that's not going to, Putin will be just getting out of bed when the missiles are hitting Moscow if there's ever a nuclear strike. So what is he going to do? He's going to automate his defenses, right? Well, he could also move the capital like another 1,000 miles away, but I don't think he's going to do that. But he'll automate his nuclear missiles to protect his things. So congratulations, guys. You've just created Skynet. Literally, that what we're describing is Skynet. And so we nearly have gone to nuclear war because flocks of seagulls were flying by Soviet radars in the 80s. There was a near nuclear war apparently in the 90s with Yeltsin as president because of a missile that took off from Norway that was mistaken as a nuclear missile. But they had the time to call up NATO and say, what the hell is this thing? And found out it was like a conventional missile test. And why would we want to have this happen? No one wants this to happen except for a few foolish people who think they can win this. Or they just are so focused on their bottom line, they don't think through the repercussions of this. But I do, and I don't want to die in nuclear fire because a flock of seagulls flew by a Russian radar, and now we're drowning, and missiles are falling all over the sky. That seems to be a bit much to me. Whew. Yeah, this is turning out to be a little longer than 20 minutes, Paul. Sorry, I'm taking a lull there. Anyways, where was I? Russian nuclear war? Yeah, that's great. That's what we all need, is to have a nuclear war. Like, God. One of the things I've read a book set during the fall of the Soviet Union by an American writer who was there. And he was talking about how amazed he was that the Soviet Union didn't end up breaking up with at least a small nuclear exchange or anything else that happened. And one of the things he describes is just how the Soviet leadership kept getting older and older and older. And because they were older, they were unable to keep up with the young. When Gorbachev comes to power, he's like in his late 40s, but most of the people on the Soviet Politburo are in their 70s or 80s. And he just is able to outthink and outmaneuver and outrun all these people because he's just younger than them and can get up a little earlier than them. And here we're dealing with the fact that America is being run by older people. At least the Democrats. Trump, of course, is old. He's lost the boomers. But most of the people, at least in the Republican Party leadership, especially with Speaker Mike Johnson and even with I guess Boehner was the one who was the last majority leader who was a boomer, and he retired in his 60s. And I remember watching a few people like John Boehner is like left in disgrace, and I'm like, a guy walking up to the microphone and singing "Zippity Doodah, Zippity Yay" is not leaving under the cloud of disgrace. He was a Catholic, or is still a Catholic. And he brought the Pope to visit and give a speech at the before Congress, and he said, "That's it. I've achieved my life's goal. I'm going into the private. I'm going to retire now." So, congratulations to him. He was always one of my, despite some of the things I learned, still one of my favorite politicians. Anyone who gets to leave on his own 2 feet and on his own terms. That's someone you got to respect, right? So, so we have this Nancy Pelosi. How old is Nancy Pelosi? She's in her 80s, though she did step down for a younger guy who's now the Democrat minority leader. You got Mike Johnson. You had, I keep wanting to say McNulty, but he's not. And you had, and now you have in the Republican leadership. I mean, you still have the Mitch McConnell, who's literally having micro strokes during the day. Like, it's too bad that and the only reason I want, maybe I would have mind seeing the Republicans win, as a conservative. I wouldn't mind seeing the Republicans win Kentucky, but it would have been nice so they could have appointed someone else, so Mitch McConnell could step down and be appointed by the new Republican governor. I think that was what a lot of people were hoping for, because it's like, maybe they take him. I wonder if they're taking back McConnell to a pod every night, and same with Biden, putting them in the pod and just kind of regenerate them for a little while to keep them going for another week or two. Okay, well, I'm going to email my erstwhile thing and say, yeah, it's been more than it's a bit longer than 20 minutes. So much for the grand reopening. Yeah, I'll definitely push this back next time to 8. Anyways, like I said, I've said a lot. Anyways, what was I? I was talking about, the fact that the McConnell and Biden probably put in rejuvenation pods. Did you see that thing with Biden recently, where we have Xi Jinping coming from China to California, which works out well for him, as now it might be China-fornia. All the Mark Ribert, who I follow on Twitter and watch his show on YouTube, he was like, what's going on here? Why are all these Chinese people wearing like communist flags and wearing all this stuff? Because the emperor is coming back. And I'm like, yeah, that's because the emperor is coming. And Chinese people, despite the fact that they're overseas, they've moved away from China, they still maintain all the relationships in a way that we don't necessarily maintain relationships with the old country and old families. So even though, like, for instance, it's covered in Mitch McConnell, the book. Anyways, in one of these books I've read, and it talked about Mitch McConnell's wife and how her father went to school with the one of the presidents of China, and that president of China and him have because of this relationship, even though she's from Taiwan and he lives in Taiwan, the Chinese government has been giving them a bunch of naval contracts to build ships in there. And I'm like, it's like, but they're like enemies. And it's like, not necessarily. There is a lot of relationships that happen between the Taiwanese and the Japanese, the mainland China and the people in America, the expat community around the world, and they maintain this. They might be living in another country, but they're retaining their Chinese civilization. And why cut off why cut that tie? Why burn the bridge? Like Cortez coming here and burning his ships to support the invasion of against the Aztecs. Well, here we have these Chinese are not burning their ships and are actually maintaining the relationships behind them, just in case, hedging their bets, keeping the lines to the old country going. So when Xi Jinping comes over here, they're more than happy to see him and welcome him here. And a lot, some spread just to keep their, just in case, the plan on hold. And so what does Biden do? So he's called Xi Jinping a dictator a few months ago. And it's like, don't call this guy. But now this time, Xi Jinping's in the room for the press conference. And some reporter asked the president, Mr. Biden, why do you still think this guy's a dictator? And he's like, of course. Why wouldn't I? And then his Secretary of State Blinken was like, oh my God, what do I do here? What do I do? Oof. Okay. Now, I thought I could rant for all this time, but geez. Yeah. Anyways, sorry for. I was really hoping I would have someone else to play off of for this part of the show. Ah, just whew, had that day just another day in the office. Fortunately, most days in the office are a bit of a drive right now, especially now. So I'm from Canada. I live here. We are having one of the great sporting events for Canada. It's called the Grey Cup. It's kind of the Canadian Super Bowl. And the Canadian Super Bowl, yeah, so we have all this additional traffic on top of the fact that the city council decided to close the bridge. So there's like coming in from Toronto, there's two major ways into Hamilton. And one way involves going down where I usually go by the lakeshore, and the other one is through this bridge. Well, this bridge is going on, having 2 years of mandatory repairs. So there's that one of their lanes is shut down. And so a lot of traffic is now flowing through down the lakeshore and heading into the city to basically get home that way. Well, we also have a third smaller portion called York Boulevard, and our crazy city council decided to green up the city and put bike lanes on York Boulevard about 5 years ago. And what happens is, for the most part, we still have 2 lanes, but there's a narrow part of the bridge where it goes down to 2 lanes for about a kilometer. So suddenly, if you're coming down York Boulevard, you're being forced into this like very narrow bulge here, and all the people are like, so you would think maybe for the bridge construction, take out the bike lanes for those part, because no one actually takes those lanes anymore. Bike lanes, especially in the winter time, because in Canada it gets cold and no one wants to bike to work in the cold. No, we can't do that in Canada. In my city, we're going to leave the bridges as is. And it's just like, so meanwhile, all these green people are like, we want people to bike more. And it's like, so instead of people getting in and out of the city easier through the transportation lanes, what you really want is a bunch of cars to idle in place and continuing to level up the smog in the city for all those bikers to cough on the few bikers that take the bike lanes. As I did last week, I was walking down the street, and bing, bing, biker comes right behind me. And of course, the bike lane is on the other side of the street, but he didn't want to go on the bike lane because it was just inconvenient. So he's still on the sidewalk. Okay. Let me just double check this. Sorry. Oh, there it is, finally. Okay. Well, I'm going to put this one down as kind of a sad. Where's my edge? Well, I've been writing for about 30 minutes now, and maybe my new co-host Paul will show up and email me, and we'll start up again in another 20 minutes. But I need to take a bit of a break. So I hope if nothing else, maybe next week, of course, is American Thanksgiving, and he's an American. So we'll probably not have a stream next week, or if it does, it'll be just me complaining for 15, 20 minutes just to keep the flow going. But I'm going to sign off for now and end the stream, and maybe he'll message me, and we'll try and go for a follow-up stream in like 20, 30 minutes. Okay. Thanks for tuning in on the replay, because though I kept getting like ones and twos, people showing up, it didn't seem we were getting a lot of the scene here. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Oh, end stream.